Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into something fundamental, maybe even a bit uncomfortable. It's this whole idea of living by radical trust.
Right. It flies in the face of how we usually operate.
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore this principle from 2 Corinthians 5.7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. What does that actually mean in practice?
That verse, it just sets up this incredible tension, doesn't it?
It really does.
The world around us, it runs on sight. It demands evidence, proof, things you can touch and measure, verified facts.
Yeah, show me the data.
Precisely. But faith, it asks for something completely different. It asks you to anchor yourself, your decisions, your actions, in a reality you can't see, an eternal one.
So it's like choosing between what your eyes are telling you right now and what these divine promises say is permanent.
That's the core conflict. It's almost a cognitive dissonance, forcing that choice. Temporary sensory input versus, permanent promises.
Okay, let's try and unpack this. Because that feeling of uncertainty, needing the full plan, the roadmap, that's so deeply human, especially now. We want the blueprint before we move.
We do. We crave certainty.
But the material we've looked at today gives us this powerful metaphor for faith. It's like a traveler walking in pitch darkness.
Yes, exactly. Guided only by a tiny lamp.
Just enough light for the next step.
It makes you think of Psalm 119, verse 105. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path.
A lamp to my feet, not floodlights for the whole journey.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? Faith doesn't promise stadium lighting, showing you everything from start to finish.
No.
It promises just enough light, just enough clarity to confidently place your next step.
And that confidence coming from something you can't see, that's what the Apostle Paul was getting at.
I think so. He's reminding us our confidence has to come from the eternal reality of God, his character, his promises, not from shaky, temporary, earthly evidence that can change in an instant.
And this isn't just, a nice idea to think about. It dictates how you act when things get tough, right?
Absolutely critical. If you only operate based on what you see, what happens when the circumstances look overwhelming? When the visible evidence screams disaster?
You freeze or panic.
Exactly. You get paralyzed.
Yeah.
So what we want to do today is help you, our listener, maybe find some of those aha moments.
Yeah.
Moments of understanding this radical trust.
How are we going to do that?
By showing it's not just theory, it's tried and tested. We need to dive into some history. Look at these incredible examples of faith in action. Case studies, if you will.
Okay.
Situations where logic seemed to completely break down, where all the visible signs pointed one way, but trust carried the day.
So real life examples.
Yes. We're going to break down 6 key historical moments. These stories really define what walking by faith means when, the destination's a mystery, or the threats are closing in fast, or you've got absolutely nothing left in the tank.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start at the beginning, really. Section 1. Faith obeys without full understanding. And for that, we have to look at Abraham.
Right. His life seems less like a steady path and more like a series of these huge, almost illogical leaps of faith.
It's a good way to put it.
So the first big one, the initial call, it's there in Genesis, and Hebrews picks it up later. God tells Abram, get out of your country, from your family, to a land that I will show you.
Just pause on that for a second. Think about the sheer scale of that command, get out.
It wasn't just moving house.
Not at all. It meant liquidating his entire existence, his wealth, his connections, his family ties, which back then, that was your entire social safety net.
Everything familiar, your culture, your security, gone.
All gone. And for what? For a destination that's completely withheld, to a land I will show you. Not, here's the map, here are the coordinates.
That detail, the blank space where the destination should be, that's what makes it faith, isn't it? Not just moving.
Absolutely. Hebrews 11 verse 8 highlights it specifically. He left without knowing where he was going.
He just went.
He just went. That's faith in its rawest form. Acting on a promise from a trusted source, even when the where is a total mystery.
And this shows that first big difference between sight and faith we talked about.
It really does. Sight demands the full itinerary upfront. Guarantees. Proof.
Right.
Faith says, I trust the one speaking enough to take the first step, even if the rest of the path is dark. The psychological weight of that uncertainty, stepping into that void,
Yeah.
that defines Abraham's initial act.
So he goes, and then years later, still no promised son, we get this pivotal moment in Genesis 15, verse 6.
Yes, crucial.
Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And this wasn't just believing he'd, get to the right place eventually. This was believing for an heir when he and Sarah were, well, biologically speaking.
As good as dead, as Hebrews puts it.
Right.
Way past childbearing age.
He believed something physically impossible based on what he could see.
And that is the critical point. Righteousness, his right standing with God, wasn't based on his actions, his perfection, or the evidence. It was credited purely because he trusted God, even for something that seemed biologically absurd.
And that trust wasn't a one-off feeling. It was tested for decades.
Decades. He had to live constantly in that tension between the physical facts of their age and the promise a nation descending from him. Sight versus faith, day in and day out.
But the paradox, it gets even deeper, doesn't it? Because after finally getting Isaac, the son of the promise,
The miracle baby.
right, then comes Genesis 22, the command to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. How does that even compute? If faith is based on God's promises, how can faith then involve destroying the very evidence of that promise?
That is the ultimate test. It's
Yeah.
breathtaking, really. It pushes his faith beyond trusting God's ability to do a miracle, like giving him a son in old age,
Okay.
to trusting God's fundamental character and his eternal power, even over death itself.
So he believed God could bring Isaac back.
The text in Hebrews suggests exactly that. Abraham reasoned that God was able even to raise him from the dead. His faith was so profound.
Wow. So he wasn't seeing Isaac's potential death as the end of the promise.
No, he saw it through the lens of resurrection power. He was operating on a completely different calculus, an eternal one that overrides earthly finality.
So the takeaway for someone listening, maybe facing a situation that seems like a dead end, or where God's leading seems to contradict past promises.
The takeaway is this: obedience often has to come before you understand the full plan.
Move first.
Move first. Trust the promise maker's integrity, even when the path looks illogical or seems to destroy the promise itself. The understanding, the way through, the resurrection power, if you like, often only reveals itself after you take that step of faith.
Faith means moving without the full itinerary.
Precisely. Move first. Understand the divine calculation later.
That's a huge challenge for us planners, isn't it? Those of us who like to control all the variables.
It really is. It asks you to relinquish control in a radical way.
Okay, so Abraham teaches us about that proactive obedience, stepping out towards an unknown. But Moses seems to teach us about faith when you're cornered. Reactive faith.
Yes, standing firm when crisis hits you head on. Let's shift to that moment at the Red Sea. Exodus 14.
Talk about being trapped.
It's the absolute definition of an insurmountable obstacle if you're going by sight. Just picture it.
Okay.
The visual reality is terrifying. Pharaoh's army, his best chariots, closing in fast from behind. Certain death or capture.
And in front.
The Red Sea, a massive, impassable body of water. Visually, there was nowhere to go. Sight screened one thing. Total disaster. Annihilate.
And the people. They reacted exactly as you'd expect based on those visible facts.
Completely rational panic. They turned on Moses, blamed him. They actually said it would have been better to be slaves in Egypt than to die out there.
Their logic was purely based on the geography and the army they could see.
Entirely. The visible evidence was overwhelming and pointed only to doom.
And yet, in the middle of all that completely understandable terror, Moses says something utterly counterintuitive.
He does. He tells this terrified crowd, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord."
Stand still.
While an army is charging.
Crazy, right? He demanded they stop reacting to the visible threat and instead anchor their hope in an unseen power, an unseen intervention.
This is where sight gives way to spiritual vision.
Exactly. And that quality in Moses, that ability to see beyond the immediate threat, is captured so powerfully later in Hebrews 11, verse 27. It says, "By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible."
Seeing him who is invisible. That phrase is incredible. How did he manage that when faced with chariots and soldiers?
It seems he shifted his focus. He wasn't fixated on the size of the visible threat, Pharaoh's army. Powerful, yes. Temporary, yes. Visible, yes.
But Moses endured because his focus, his faith, was locked onto the character of the invisible God. He knew God's power was eternal, unchanging, and ultimately greater than any temporary visible power Pharaoh could muster.
So the Red Sea wasn't the main reality for him.
It seems not. The obstacle was secondary. The primary reality was the faithfulness of the invisible God working behind the scenes.
Okay, but practically speaking, what does stand still mean when you're about to be overrun? Surely faith doesn't mean doing nothing.
Good question. It's not about inaction in the sense of apathy. It's about disciplined non-reaction. Meaning refusing to panic, refusing to make desperate, fear-driven moves like trying to flee into the sea or surrendering in terror. Moses was essentially saying, hold your position, trust. Don't let the visible dictate your response. This battle isn't yours to fight in that way. Wait for the invisible God to act.
It's a complete rejection of the urgency the visible threat is imposing.
Exactly. Faith gives you that inner fortitude, that ability to endure, to stand firm when every rational instinct based on sight is screaming at you to run or give up.
So for someone listening today, when the walls feel like they're closing in,
the lesson from Moses is, acknowledge the visible threat, yes, but don't let it dictate your next move. Anchor your focus firmly on the promise, the character of the invisible deliverer. Trust him to make the way, even when sight shows no way at all.
Okay, so Moses is about standing firm in a crisis. What about Noah? His story feels different again. It's about long-term commitment to something that seems utterly bizarre.
That's right. We move from immediate crisis to this long, drawn-out act of faith based on something with zero historical precedent. Building the ark.
Yeah, the lack of precedent is key here, isn't it? The sources suggest that in Noah's time, rain, as we understand it, maybe didn't even exist. The earth was watered differently, perhaps by a mist.
So imagine God tells you, build a giant boat because I'm going to flood the entire world with water falling from the sky.
And you've never seen rain. Nobody has.
Exactly. There's no scientific data, no historical record, no visible evidence whatsoever to support this prediction of a global flood. He was asked to commit maybe decades, some traditions say over a century, to this massive construction project based purely on a warning about something unprecedented.
Try pitching that today, the Global Ark Project. The risk assessment would be zero. It sounds completely absurd if you rely only on observable reality.
Utterly absurd. It wasn't just believing something improbable. It was committing your life to preparing for something the world had never, ever seen.
Hebrews 11, verse 7 points this out, right? That Noah was divinely warned of things not yet seen.
Yes. And critically, he acted on that warning before there was a single cloud in the sky. He moved with what the text calls godly fear.
That's not panic, is it? Godly fear.
No, it's not panic. It's more like a profound respect, an action-oriented acknowledgement of God's word about a future certainty. So he starts building the ark while the sun is shining, the weather's perfect, and everyone else is probably thinking he's lost his mind.
The psychological pressure over all those years. Decades of labor, the ridicule from neighbors, the constant temptation to just look at the clear blue sky and think this is pointless.
That sustained, relentless commitment, that's the real insight from Noah. Faith demands prompt obedience to God's word, yes, but sometimes it also demands perseverance in that obedience, regardless of how illogical or unnecessary it looks based on current, visible reality.
His neighbors saw a man wasting his life.
They saw the sunshine, they saw the dry ground, they operated by sight. Noah, through faith, saw the coming flood. He acted on the certainty of the unseen warning.
So that duration, maybe 100 years of building, what does that teach us today?
It teaches that faith sometimes requires an immense, long-haul commitment. You might be called to build something, pursue a vision, make a stand based only on God's instruction, even when there's absolutely zero observable data backing it up right now.
And the world might call you foolish.
The world will call you foolish. Noah shows us that God's unseen word has to become more real, more tangible, more trustworthy to you than the visible circumstances, even if those circumstances stay unchanged for years, decades. His faith wasn't a flash in the pan. It was steady, disciplined, methodical work, day after day, year after dry year, based entirely on that unseen warning.
Okay, so we've had proactive movement with Abraham, standing firm with Moses, long-term commitment with Noah. Now let's shift to the battlefield. Joshua and the city of Jericho. If Noah's plan seemed illogical, this strategy seems actively counter-military.
Oh, completely. It defied every known principle of siege warfare at the time.
Right. You're facing Jericho, massive walls, heavily fortified, a huge visible obstacle. Standard procedure would be battering rams, siege towers, maybe starving them out.
Brute force, logical tactics.
Yeah.
But God's instructions in Joshua chapter 6, utterly bizarre. March around the city once a day for 6 days, then 7 times on the 7th. It's just marching. A huge physical effort with absolutely no apparent tactical purpose. You wouldn't weaken the walls. It wouldn't scare the defenders in a conventional sense.
And there's that detail about silence too, isn't there? Except for the priests blowing trumpets.
Yes. That's crucial. Why the silence? If you wanted to intimidate them, you'd be shouting war cries the whole time.
Makes sense.
The silence, I think, served a profound purpose for the Israelites themselves. It was an act of discipline. It stopped them from complaining, questioning the bizarre strategy, letting their morale collapse. It forced reliance on God.
So it neutralized the human tendency to second guess or rely on their own noise and strength.
Exactly. God's method sidelined the human element, doubt, logic, fear, even their own perceived strength, ensuring that when the victory came, nobody could claim it was down to clever tactics or military might.
So those 6 days of silent marching were like a long, active waiting period.
Yeah.
A test of obedience designed to make them rely solely on the invisible power.
I think that's a great way to see it. The visible reality was unchanging. Those huge, impenetrable walls stood firm day after day. The faith instruction was, keep marching, keep quiet, trust the process.
Until
God's timing. Then the signal trumpets blow, everyone shouts, and the walls fell down flat, as the text says. Instantly, catastrophically.
And Hebrews 11, verse 30 ties it directly to faith. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days.
It demonstrates powerfully that God's methods often defy human logic. Why? Perhaps because he wants the outcome to be unmistakably his doing, his power, not human ingenuity.
So the application for us when we face our own Jericho walls?
It means sometimes walking by faith requires embracing a strategy that looks foolish, maybe even passive or nonsensical by worldly standards. When God instructs, trusting him might mean setting aside what seems sensible, logical, or effective based on human experience, and choosing his unconventional method instead, even if it involves marching silently in circles for a while.
Yeah.
Trust the method because you trust the commander.
Okay, from city walls down to a one-on-one confrontation. David and Goliath, 1 Samuel 17. This has to be one of the starkest visual contrasts in all these stories.
Absolutely. It's the ultimate picture of perceived human inadequacy versus overwhelming physical power.
You've got Goliath. He's enormous, over 9 feet tall, decked out in bronze armor, shield, spear, like a weaver's beam, sword. He is the embodiment of visible material strength and military advantage.
He looks unbeatable, terrifying.
And then you have David, a young shepherd, no armor, armed with a staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones.
Based purely on sight, it's not even a contest. It's a foregone conclusion. David looks utterly outmatched.
And King Saul and the entire Israelite army, they clearly agreed. They looked at Goliath, assessed the visible facts, his size, his armor, and they were paralyzed with fear.
They were walking completely by sight. Their fear was a direct result of focusing on the visible threat and comparing it to their own visible resources.
But David, his perspective is just radically different.
Totally different. He wasn't comparing himself to Goliath. He wasn't even primarily looking at Goliath.
What was he looking at?
He was assessing the visible threat, Goliath, against the invisible reality of the sovereign God of Israel. He reframed the entire conflict.
And his words, they're just electric. He basically ignores the physical disparity. He shouts, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand."
That's the absolute core of it. Faith in action when facing inadequacy. David's focus is entirely external, on God. He shifts the battle from a physical contest between two fighters to a spiritual confrontation. God's chosen people versus this defiant champion who is insulting God.
He argues Goliath's size is irrelevant.
Essentially, yes. He says the battle belongs to the Lord, and God doesn't need swords or spears to save. Goliath's visible advantages are meaningless against God's invisible power.
Let's talk about the weapon choice, though. The sling, why that? It seems so insignificant compared to Goliath's gear.
That's a fascinating point. The sling was often seen as a shepherd's tool, maybe for chasing off predators. Not exactly frontline military hardware against a heavily armored giant.
Right.
But faith often seems to choose the unconventional, the underestimated tool. Why? Perhaps precisely because it ensures that when the victory comes, no one can credit human technology or skill. David's faith allowed him to see his apparent weakness. No armor, no sword, not as a disadvantage, but as the perfect stage for God's strength to be displayed.
So the lesson for us when we're facing our own giants, overwhelming problems, impossible odds.
The lesson is crystal clear. Faith demands a complete psychological shift, a reframing.
How so?
Walking by faith means you have to stop looking at the giant through the lens of your own limitations, your own perceived weaknesses or lack of resources.
Instead,
And instead, view the giant through the lens of God's infinite power and sovereignty. Faith shifts your focus entirely away from self-doubt and inadequacy, anchoring it firmly in that external, unseen, far greater power. David didn't deny Goliath was big. He denied Goliath's ultimate significance because the evidence of the invisible God was far more compelling to him than the visible facts of the giant.
Okay, our final example takes us from the battlefield to a situation of desperate personal scarcity. Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, 1 Kings 17. This is survival mode.
Absolute rock bottom. The visible reality here is just bleak. There's a severe famine. Elijah finds this widow, and she confirms she has practically nothing left.
Just a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar.
Exactly. Enough, she says, for one final tiny meal for herself and her son. After that, they expect to die. That is the harsh, undeniable, visible fact. No savings, no reserves, no hope based on sight.
And into that utter desperation, Elijah gives this instruction that sounds almost cruel.
It's incredibly challenging. He says essentially, okay, before you make that last meal for yourselves, make me a small cake first.
Use your very last resource to feed me, a stranger.
Yes. It demanded the immediate sacrifice of their absolute final provision. It asked her to prioritize God's prophet, God's word through him, ahead of her own and her son's survival instincts.
Talk about testing trust to the absolute limit.
It really does. Every visible sign, every instinct based on sight would scream, hold on to that last bit, protect your son. But Elijah's instruction, representing God's word, demanded she act against that instinct. Faith here becomes active sacrifice based on a promise.
The promise being?
The promise Elijah gives her. The bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth.
Still making that first cake for him, giving away the only tangible evidence of survival she had. The mental hurdle must have been immense.
Agonizing, surely. That's the crux of it. Faith has to override the scarcity mindset that sight produces. The widow had to choose. Act based on the pitiful amount of flour her eyes could see, or act based on the unseen promise delivered by God's prophet. She chose belief over sight, literally in the face of death.
And the result is really instructive too. The provision wasn't some sudden windfall, right? Not a truckload of flour and oil.
No, and this is so important. The text says the flour and oil didn't run out, but it implies it was just enough day by day, enough for that day's meal.
Just enough.
Just enough for many days until the famine ended. This might be one of the most humbling lessons about walking by faith regarding provision. It often comes as sufficiency, not overwhelming surplus.
So it teaches moment-by-moment dependence.
Exactly. Instead of relying on big, visible reserves that make you feel secure about the future, faith teaches dependence on God's immediate sufficient supply for today. It replaces the anxiety of, what about tomorrow, with trust for the needs of this moment.
So the evidence of the invisible promise had to be renewed every single morning when she went to that jar.
Precisely. It required a daily recommitment to trust, a daily choice to believe the promise over the potentially empty-looking container. Walking by faith in scarcity often means trusting for the daily bread, not the lifetime supply.
Wow. 6 incredibly powerful stories. We've covered a lot of ground here, looking at how faith operates when sight fails.
We really have. From Abraham stepping into the unknown, to Moses at the Red Sea, Noah building the ark, Joshua at Jericho, David facing Goliath, and the widow sharing her last meal.
It seems like these stories give us a kind of framework, a set of actions for what walking by faith actually looks like.
I think they do. We can kind of synthesize them, can't we?
Yeah, let's try. Based on these examples, when you don't understand the plan, when it seems illogical,
you obey like Abraham. Trust the one giving the instructions, even if the why or where is unclear.
Right, when you can't see a way forward, when you're trapped by circumstances.
You stand firm like Moses. Endure by focusing on the invisible God's power and character, not the size of the visible threat. Don't panic.
Okay. When God's plan seems strange, unconventional, maybe even ineffective by human standards,
you commit like Noah and trust the method like Joshua. Accept the long haul, embrace the seemingly foolish strategy, knowing God's ways achieve his purposes.
And when fear rises up, when you feel completely inadequate for the task,
you focus on God's power like David. Reframe the problem. See it through the lens of his sovereignty, not your limitations.
And finally, when resources are low, when scarcity seems to be the only reality you can see,
you depend daily like Elijah's widow. Trust God for the immediate provision, the just enough for today, sacrificing the anxiety about tomorrow for dependence on him now.
That really covers a lot of life's challenges.
It brings us right back to that foundational definition, doesn't it? Hebrews 11, verse 1.
Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Substance and evidence. Think about those words. Faith isn't just wishful thinking. It's presented as something solid, something real.
But it's substance and evidence for things you cannot see. It turns the world's definition of proof completely upside down.
It absolutely does. And that's really the grand conclusion, the main takeaway from this deep dive. Our physical sight, it's fundamentally unreliable in the long run. Circumstances change in a heartbeat. Resources run out. Visible supports can crumble.
Sure.
But faith keeps its eyes fixed on a different reality, an eternal, unchanging one. It operates on the conviction that the invisible God is more reliable, more real, more substantial than anything in the visible world we can touch or measure.
So walking by faith is accepting that paradox.
Yeah.
That the best evidence might be the evidence you can't physically confirm.
That's it, exactly. It's choosing to trust the unseen promise over the seen problem.
Okay, so to bring this home for everyone listening, if we take all these lessons, these examples, what's the final, maybe provocative thought or challenge for us right now?
Well, if faith truly is the evidence of things not seen, then the challenge becomes personal, doesn't it? We have to ask ourselves, what current visible circumstance in my life, that career challenge that looks impossible, that financial situation that seems hopeless, that relationship uncertainty, that future path is completely unclear, which of these things is demanding that I stop relying solely on the visible facts before my eyes?
And instead
Choose to lean on the evidence of the invisible. Am I willing right now in this situation to trust the unseen certainty of God's character and his promises, even when it contradicts what I can see?
that choice.
That choice right there is the ongoing daily challenge of truly walking by faith, not by sight.